To build our application, we're going to use NextJS. It's a framework that's built off of a framework called React, which was built by Facebook, now known as Meta. I personally think that it's the easiest, most approachable web framework that exists out there. React was already pretty, easy to use, but Next.js kind of brings it to another level in terms of like the approachability. There's certain parts of it that are a little bit more challenging to understand. There's trade-offs to everything, of course, pros and cons. Personally, I think that, some of the things that are more complicated with it, once you gain a little bit of an understanding about it, pretty trivial to work with. So we're going to be using Next.js. It's developed by a company named Vercel. Vercel is part of it is a deployment platform for websites. We're going to be using that to kind of push our website to production at the end of this tutorial. So we'll revisit the parent company of Next.js. But in order to get started, here you can go to nextjs.org/docs if you want to get more of a deep dive, more of an understanding of this. This tutorial, I'm going to try to make it as approachable as possible, whether you have a lot of web development experience or you don't. Try to make it as approachable to everyone as much as possible. So we're going to get started by installing Next.js. So you're going to go to whatever terminal that you're using. I personally use Windows Subsystem for Linux. For MacBook, it's a lot easier. You just go to the terminal, look up a tutorial to get you familiar with, I think they use ZSH. So just get yourself familiar with that. If you're using Windows Subsystem for Linux, I personally use Ubuntu on it, standard Linux, with a bash shell. So all those things, tech jargon. All you need to do is just be able to get a terminal, a Linux terminal somewhere. You'll be able to follow this tutorial pretty easily. I'll put some different guides or tutorials in the description for Windows and MacBook, Mac OS. I don't think if you're using Linux, you probably don't need a tutorial for that. But we'll get you squared away if you're using Mac OS or Windows in the description down below. So we're going to be using this command here. So look, we're just going to be following a lot of the stuff that goes on here to basically get started. So we're going to do npx create next app at latest, and after this, they don't include it in their instructions here, but what we're going to do is just use the name of your application. So I'm going to use Poke CRM. One of the funny things about developing a tutorial like this is that I get to, use these products myself. So don't use Poke CRM. I've reserved that. Be original. Create your own name for this Mailchimp-inspired CRM. But for me, I'm going to use my own brand that I'm building up, the Poke brand. So please, come up with some cool names. Comment it down below, the name to your website. Excited to see what, what puns or what interesting ways you're able to spice up a name around our CRM. So just adding the name there, right? So 3 words, basically, npx, and then create the next app at latest with Poke CRM. Just going to hit enter, let it run for a little bit. It's going to ask to install this package. You're going to hit Y and then enter, yes to continue. So Next.js, right, JavaScript framework, but Microsoft has created a type-safe version of it called TypeScript. We're going to be using TypeScript just because if you're using JavaScript and you're adamant about using JavaScript, you just get rid of all the random type stuff. But for me, I personally recommend, just for error checking reasons and for, the clean, making sure your code's clean, to use TypeScript. So again, if you're not technical, just hit yes, follow what I'm doing, hit yes for most of these things. This one happens to be no, so that's why I paused. But it's already defaulted to no, so great. And you're just gonna let it install. So I'll be right back once this is finished. All right, awesome. So it just finished installing. Don't worry if, there was a little spinner thing here, if it was hanging and freezing. It's just It depends on the computer. Sometimes my MacBook, it's super easy, fast. It just completes in a couple minutes, in a couple seconds. And then, on my Windows machine, I don't know why it takes a little bit longer. But if it freezes, if it hangs a little bit, just let it run, give it time, be a little patient with it. Once it finishes, what you're going to find is that it created a new folder here, or directory. Since we're working in a Linux-based file structure, we're going to call them directories. And you're going to basically want to go into it. So in the terminal, right, to access a directory and go into it with bash, you're just going to cd poke CRM. In MacBook, if you're using ZSH, should be the same command. So just follow what I'm doing. If you cd into it, you're going to see that, hey, they added in a bunch of stuff here, right? And so instead of looking at a lot of these individual pieces, right, which can be a little bit confusing, what we're going to go to is open it up in VS Code. Make it look a lot easier than in the terminal. We'll go back to the terminal a little bit later, but for now, I think that looking at it within VS Code will be a lot easier to understand. So cool. So we chose to add a source folder. You're going to see why a little bit later on, why we added it. But within this, we're going to be worrying about most of our code within the source folder here. Some of it's going to go in app, and then some of it is going to go at the source level. So just be very aware of where you put files and where things belong within this file structure, because in Next.js it's very particular, and a lot of things are predicated on how you not just where you place files and folders, but how you name them. There's a lot of things about naming conventions with the folders, and look, there were a bunch of messy different ways that people were, creating structures and, defining where things go and having different things interact with each other. Personally, I think that the naming conventions and file conventions of Next.js to be the easiest to get the results that you want once you understand it. So we're going to take some time to actually go and understand it. So we're going to put this side by side here, and basically take a look at the little tutorial where they're talking about this. So we're more concerned about this, right? So we have the top level source folder, right? We're using the app router, so that's why we have app here, right? There exists a thing called Pages router. It's a little bit older. App router is the newer thing, so we're going to be using that. We don't have a public folder yet, but it talks about static assets to be served. So if we have some form of a logo, we can put it within the public folder in order for our website to access it, right? And then we have the source folder here, right? So we have an app router inside of an optional application source folder. We're going to be adding stuff like a database and kind of helper functionality to our application that we'll put outside of our app, just because, as we'll go into it a little bit second, those things aren't going to be in the final website. They just allow for the website to run. And so the things that actually appear in the website will include within the app structure here. Anything that's just kind of a helper or things that go alongside of it will be putting within the source folder. So great. Here's a more in-depth description. Feel free to pause if you want to read through and understand it again. Please go to the Next.js documentation if you want to learn more about the specific things, but this basically talks about all of these files which are on what is called the root level. So if you ever hear me talking about the root level, that's going to be at all of these files level of the folder. If you extend downwards, right, there's the source folder, right? And so if I'm talking about the source level, then there's, the favicon, the globals.css, the layout.css, all that type of stuff. And in fact, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for the tutorial. Usually I code in an environment that's a lot smaller, or a lot bigger screen real estate wise, instead of like half and half C's here. So that's why I make it a little bit smaller. And in fact, I'm just gonna extend this out a little bit and bring back over here. We don't need to, see too much on this side. So there's some routing conventions and more information that we're going to go into in a second. But in order to, just allow for you to have an understanding of how powerful Next.js is, basically what we're going to do is go back to our terminal here and run a simple command, npm run dev. This allows for us to basically run what's in our the code that's within our directory, right? Within our poke CRM, we can see here within our VS Code. And so you can see here that we basically created a little local server. So this website here, http://localhost:3000, it's really only a website that we can access within our local network. And really, actually, not just on our local network, but within our computer, right? Within our host, the PC in which this server is running, right? So on my computer, I'll be able to go to this website and access it, right? So if I do https://localhost:3000, right? Oh, I did HTTPS by accident. It should be HTTP. You can see that it's starting to run, get things compiled, and you can see that Next.js already has some starter code within here, right? And so, if we go back to our VS Code, we can actually go in and see, oh boy, right? In order to get this, they have a lot of code already. But look, we don't need to, be bogged down by having all of this. So instead, what we're going to do is just get rid of all of this, right? And just make it look quite simple. So we're just going to start with, a simple placement here. So we're going to create a div tag here, and we're just going to write hello world, right? And basic tutorial for most things, and see just what happens, right, when we do that. Great. So we removed basically everything from the screen. We removed a lot of the styling you might have seen earlier, and I can reverse this a little bit. You can see that there was a lot of, within this class name for this div tag, a lot of styling that allowed for this to appear, right? And so if we just go back to our hello world example, we got rid of most of it, right? To which we can see that when we start at the top left corner, right? And we start working our way right and down, depending on where we place things, right? And so, if we were to put a div here and put hello world, nothing should really be changing, right? Because it's just, div within a div. But let's just say we copy pasted it and put it in, right? Okay, we stack them on top of each other. And look, when I was talking about within the framework that there were things that certain things could appear in a row configuration, right? So if we created something called flex and then use in the styling flex-row, you can see that it actually is tailwind that we're using here to style it. So just some tailwind shorthand that is being put within this class name. It actually is just an alias for a lot of CSS underneath the hood. When we call flex row here, let's just see what happens. Okay, so once we've saved there, you can see that they're all now in one row, right? Which is to be expected. If we don't put row here, they go back to, get rid of that too. They go back to their column, right? So you can also see there, right, that when we use flex here, underneath, all that type of stuff, automatically, it's considered a row. Flex just means that it takes up the whole space of the container, right? And so technically, if it takes up the whole space this way, then all of the stuff that's within it flows that way, right? And so if we add in flex dash row back in, you know, it's pretty much the same thing. We can add in a little piece of tailwind here, gap x dash 2, to basically provide a little bit of spacing here, right? And if you go into this, you can see 8 pixels of spacing is 2. You know, if we did 1 instead, that would be 4. Just arbitrary why they created that. I'm sure there's a particular reason, but you know, these are just the numbers in which we go by. I think it has to do with the character size or length. So if we're just working based off of that, right, we can see, like, you know, gap x of 20, you know, about 20's worth going out that way, which is 80 pixels. So you have 80 pixels between the two. So you can see there the basis in which we can start to add different placements, right? Now, you might be wondering, why is this black naturally? Is it because I might have dark mode on, or what's going on? Well, it's because in this globals.css, they've defined the background here, right? Prefers color scheme dark. They have this dark mode here, right? You see background var dark, negative background, all that type of stuff. Dash background, sorry, not negative. Which is obviously pulling this black color, and you can see all the highlighting here. If you want to know, we have a couple packages within, or sorry, extensions within VS Code here. Whoops. That I've installed, right? Color highlighting, I think, is a good one. IntelliCode is a good one. VS TypeScript. So if you see some of the things popping up, like these warnings and these colors, they just have to do with different IntelliSense stuff that I've added. So I think the necessary ones is color highlight, which creates this nice little color thing with the color wheel. You'll be able to check out all of that type of stuff related to color through this extension. Autocomplete via IntelliCode and this JavaScript TypeScript extension here. And then lastly, there's also the Tailwind CSS, which is when we do this class name here, right? You know, for whatever reason, we wanted to add padding of whatever amount. You can see that we have a bunch of autocompletes here for stuff that's within Tailwind. So if we were to type in, you know, 43, it doesn't do anything. I think 40 was one of them. Let me just check. Yep. 40 was one of them. So if you do that, you can see that there's a padding of 40 here now, right? So those are some of the extensions there. Sorry, a little tangent there. But again, if you want to remove the background there, all you have to do is that's just remove all that bit there, right? So I'm sure, you know, you can declare whatever foreground, background that you want by default. You know, for me, I prefer to have things be in white, and then I'll add in black or whatever color that I want, as opposed to starting with, you know, black and then having to, you know, add white stuff over time, right? Like add, you know, white boxes and containers and all that type of stuff. Another thing that we want to look at is placement of some of these things and how Flex deals with it, right? And so let's just say, now that I have everything white, I can use background of red to show you just where these things are extending to, these containers here, right? So usually I kind of use container to kind of discuss divs, just because that's generally the function of what these divs are for. If we used, again, background of blue here to show, hey, see this portion here, right, with padding of 40, pushes all these things out 160 pixels, right? So in every direction, it's pushing 160 pixels, right? In every direction. If I just wanted it in the X direction, so along the sides, right, you just px of 40, right? So that pushes it out. You can see we still have this gap x of 20. That's why hello world being pushed in this direction in that manner. And, you know, if we just copy pasted this here, right, we would have gapx of 20 alongside 40, and I'll just turn this to green just so we can see that, right? So we have this pushing of 20 here, and then we still have the x of 40. And look, we can also just have y here, right? And so this is vertically padded and added 40, while this is horizontal, right? So just kind of showcasing, right, how we can adjust different things, different layouts within our website using Tailwind. A key thing for us to understand also is the difference between padding and margin. And so, you know, and I think an easy way to do this is probably just do, just m of 20, p of 20, just to kind of show and illustrate what's going on here. And in fact, we'll actually get rid of this real quick, just to kind of show the point here. So this thing is flex, so it fully extends to the right. We'll talk about why it doesn't fully extend downwards in a moment, but or how to get that working. You can see here that we have the red here, which means it's talking about the outer container's background here, and then we have the blue, which is kind of the inner container background here. And so you can see here that the margin means from this inner container's edge here, how much margin does it have? It has 20, right, which is 80 pixels again, away from the edge of the outer container's edge, right? So that is 20 of margin, and then padding is what is on the inside, right? So you have 20 here, 80 pixels, right, from the contents on the inside here, this hello world, and the container's edge, and then from the kind of outer container's edge, we have a margin of 20. So that just kind of shows you the difference, padding and margin. We're going to be using it a lot throughout this tutorial, so it's a pretty bog standard basic thing, but just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page with it. Okay, one last thing. There's always a meme where we always say to new developers, try to center a div. It's actually a really funny thing because of how NextJS works. If we try to center a div in the way that we conventionally might think it works, let's see what happens. So we're just going to remove all of this stuff. We'll keep this just because, or rather we'll keep the padding and the blue just so that we'll have this portion here, right? None of the red because we just removed it. And, if we just thought like, hey, we're taking flex, and remember that flex makes something take up the whole space of the container, right? So if we did flex of height and width full, and we asked that its items were centered and to have everything in it justified, then this should technically make the div centered. So let's refresh and take a look at what's happening. Okay, so you can see here that we basically have it along the x-axis, right, horizontally centered, but vertically it seems to be stuck on the top. And if we look at it, right, height of full here in Tailwind means that height is 100%. But for some reason, it doesn't go all the way vertically, right, on the y-axis. So one of the reasons for that is we go back to this globals.css, and there's always something every single time I create a new thing, and you might be wondering, like, oh, why does this centering a div actually matter? Well, it's because you have to add something into this globals.css, and it's just 4 lines, and really it could fit in 1 line, but I usually write it this way just to make it more clear. HTML body in the root, we want to make the height 100%, and after we do that, it gets centered. So I'm sure that there's some particular reason and design choice in which they didn't want it to automatically be a height of 100, right? You saw in the previous, or in its original source code when we first created this Next.js app, that it was able to have things aligned in a particular format, by just pushing the padding down and whatever else. But, you know, if we're really just trying to get stuff within the center, of which, if we remember in our designs here, like, for example, the sign-in screen, this is going to be right in the middle, right? So we're going to need to be able to center this container here, right, a div, in a similar format as this hello world, right? So just like how we have this thing in the center, this hello world here, you can imagine we're just going to add in a little login title here, a little user preferred login method, subtitle, and then 2 buttons for logging in with Google or GitHub, right? So, you know, little method to the madness of why I kind of explained this centering of a div example here. We're going to need to use it later. It's just a thing that we wanted to show everyone so that we can allow for everyone to get on the same page. Now, one of the things that we had discussed earlier that I might want to go into, right, is talking about this app routing here. And that basically within this app folder, right, you can see here that we do localhost 3000. Now, if I tried to go to, for example, home, right, it would give me an error of 404 and say this page is not found. And that's because we don't have a home that's defined over within this routing structure, right? So if you just imagine, right, this URL here as being a proxy for this app folder structure, then this page.tsx, right, corresponds to the NextJS page that exists for this segment of the URL, right? And so all of the different HTML tags, and within TypeScript and React, these are called JSX. So this piece of JSX here, right, corresponds to, or is contained within this page here, right? And, you know, we can call this root. They decided to label it home, right? But we could technically do something quite interesting. One thing that we can do is actually explicitly declare a home folder here, right? And create a page.tsx here. And we don't need to copy this. And in fact, I can actually get rid of this part of this here and just create something here, const homepage. And feel free to copy this if you want to try it yourself, or, you know, you can just watch along. And thank you, Copilot. That seems good enough. Every single time we declare a page here, we need to export default, right? And there's a little explanation provided by Copilot. I don't know if it's right or not, so we'll get it off the screen. But yeah, for this basic portion here, right, we should basically, if you try to guess, maybe you can pause the video and think about it a little bit and guess what it's going to look like. The answer, after you pause it, is what we should expect is that if we go to home, localhost 3000/home, because we declared home here, right, and have a page that corresponds to it, then we should have basically a screen. And because we haven't styled this container in any way, remember that it starts from top to bottom, left to right. And so we should probably just see homepage along the top left. So let's see if that is what we see. So cool, we don't see that 404 error anymore. That's not found because we've actually declared it, right? So basically, this is the way in which we can do navigation within React. Another thing to note, right, is that we put this in the root, and sometimes that can get a little bit confusing. Like, let's say we wanted to create a landing page here, right, and explicitly call it a landing page, as opposed to just having this page here within the app. It's not as clear. So if we just move this, actually, we can actually just get rid of this because it has a home notation and it's kind of not clear. We can just recreate what we had within that first one. So I'm just going to do this really quick, right, and just create some random landing page here. This is a different notation here. So you notice that I created a full arrow function here, right, and returned something. Well, a shorthand is way of doing it is actually just doing parentheses, wrapping your JSX here, these HTML tags in Next.js. Again, they're called JSX. Putting them within these parens, right? You can return them directly, right? This arrow function just returns this. If we had any more functions, and you'll see it later on, this type of notation with the curly braces here, and if you look on your keyboard, they're right next to the P, you'll basically be able to return your JSX that you want corresponding with each page, and then actually have more stuff being declared here, right? So we'll go more into that later on, but just to do this, we'll make it very clear just for the second, right? So this is the home page. If we get rid of home here, it's not export default, so you can see that it's an error because I forgot to export default here. Export default the landing page, and here we can see there's the landing page. Now you saw here that I did the parens notation, right? Because if we tried to do, right, because you see home here as opposed to landing here with the parentheses, parentheses means that it ignores the name of the folder. And basically, the app, when it kind of goes within its renders within the browser, it kind of goes through and looks for the base level page and then works its way through the URL, right? And so this is a blank one, so it's looking for the top level one. Well, inside of this app folder, you can see there's no page.tsx. So it goes down and it says, and it tries to match, and it says, okay, well, we're ignoring this name landing page because it has these two parentheses. And so it goes into this page here, and then it prints out this landing page. And you might have seen that I wrap this around an H1. I didn't wrap it here. Both are essentially the same. It's just how you want to style it, right? Again, it's a minor thing, right? If you wanted to style the text independently from the container, you can do that. It's also comes into effect when you have more than one thing, like a header here, another H1 with some more text. You know, you just gather a bunch of them within the container. But here you can see right within this landing page, the parentheses, they're ignoring it, right? If we went to /landing, it would be a 404 because, again, these parentheses makes this route, this folder name, ignored. So you can see there's landing there, and if we go back to home, we'll see that it goes through, ignores landing because it's not the root. It looks for home, finds the page, and goes from there. Another interesting thing is that you could read the URL. So let's just say, for example, and I just wanted to pull it up real quick before we go into dynamic routings here within the VS Code here, right? And you can read more about it actually under this here. But just to kind of explain it at a top level, right? If we wanted to do home and have a very specific folder name, right? Home, and just say, 1, 2, 3 here, right? And then created a page.tsx. Actually, we'll test this and see, because I actually want to see if actually the numbers would work. But just say numbers page here, and then just return div 1, 2, 3 here. Or actually, yeah, that would be good. 1, 2, 3 page. And then let's just see here, home /1, 2, 3. Again, we did not export default. I forgot about that. This is a good reminder for each one of those. And you see that gets rendered. So very specifically, we can call that slug there, right? Home, and then you extend it by having 1, 2, 3 here. But you know, if you had multiple different types of numbers, right? Let's just say, like, you know, you had a user and you wanted to get like a user ID and it's a series of numbers. Well, you don't want to hard code 1,000 of these, right? Or a million, or however many users you're going to have. So what you're instead going to use, right, is these catch-all route segments. And sometimes you're going to have optional catch-all segments, right? Let's say you just wanted a base home. It may or may not have a number. That's when the optional comes into account. If you want it to have a number, right? Let's say, for example, like you wanted to have a particular user. Well, having a user without their user ID would probably be hard for you to search for a specific user. So you might want to use this catch-all route, this forced one, to force the URL, or to force the user to actually provide a number within the URL. Else, you'd get a 404 because, the user without its user ID, you can't really do anything with it. So, in the case of like home here, but hey, if you wanted to add some extra numbers, it could possibly have it. You'd use the optional, which has this extra square brackets, right? And so that's, again, right where you found the curly braces, right next to the P key on your keyboard. So let's try this out in an example. And here, we're just going to call this an ID here. And let's take a look at, save this. It's just, whenever you did the next, or the npm run dev, it created this little folder where NextJS holds all of its configuration. So when you change folder names, you might have to save this. If you ever run into an error, sometimes when it's related to an error within this folder, just delete it, run npm run dev, it'll create a new one. You won't have to worry about it. So let's just go into actually the dynamic routings here to talk about the URL slug. So before we saw, and in this example, and I'll make it full screen and zoom in just so that we can more easily see it, right? An example URL here. So like app/blog slug page.js, right? They're using JavaScript as opposed to TypeScript. So that's why you see the difference between TSX and JSX here. Weirdly, they put JS instead of if you go to JavaScript. Oh, yeah, I guess JavaScript. Huh. I thought you had a JSX on this, but I've been using TypeScript for a long time, so you have to use the TSX convention whenever you create a file that has JSX in it. This part here. If you just had TS here, you can't use these because they're not recognized. So if we just remember what I did before there, right? And we created home, right? Home instead of blog, and we just created some form of slug, right? The slug would have a particular, number, letter, whatever, right? And so if we wanted to retrieve a dynamic one, we'd have to use something very similar here. We create a prop, or not a create, but we just retrieve a prop that is automatically provided inside of our page called params, and just say how our param structure should look like, right? And in this case, right, they have a slug here, and it's of type string. So we're going to go back into our app here and do the same thing, something similar. But in our case, URL, for the most part, is pretty safe to do it as string. You're just trying to try to parse a string, for example, for numbers here. You might want to parse it if you want it in specific number format. String being just a bunch of letters of which numbers are included. But if you wanted to use numbers specifically in TypeScript, you have to change it over from a string format to an actual numeric format. We'll actually be doing that later on in the tutorial, so we can go into that more into detail later. But here, we're going to use those curly braces again, declare params here, right? And there's kind of two ways that we can do it. We can create an interface here of the props that are going to be in numbers pages, and we can do a params ID of string. And just like how they matched this with this, we're matching our ID here with this ID over in our file structure here. So again, we're going to say that these params are of type numbers page props, numbers inside of numbers page props, which is an interface that provides params, and the params are any ID of type string. So cool. What can we do with that? Well, what we can do is write the, and let's do this in a somewhat clean way. So we'll write a string here, ID colon, and then have this here, append params.id to this. So if we go back to this, we can see ID of 1, 2, 3. If we change this to 4, 5, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and any string, right? It doesn't have to be just numbers, right? Hello world. The ID is of hello world. Now, what happens if we accidentally added a space here? Oh, that looks kind of weird, right? So let's just make sure that whenever we do navigation in the future, and we'll see more what that means later on down the line, we just make sure that our params are written in the way that we expect, right? So generally with spaces, we'll just write dashes. We have hello dash world, and you know, we try to write it in a way that's convenient for the URL to understand, and usually no spaces are included within URLs. Cool. Let's move on. Okay, so before we go on to more dev-related stuff, we're going to need some components, right? So we could take the time and write all of the JSX ourselves, or we could leverage something called Shadcn. And what Shadcn provides is basically a bunch of pre-made components that you can just copy and paste wherever we need them within our application. They're open source, you can change them yourselves. We're actually going to do a little bit of changing here or there depending on our needs, and really just for the sake of showing that you can change them at some points. But really super useful, super helpful. They all look really great. The one that we're really going to be using right off of the bat is this button here. You can see it, there's a little mouse cursor, it's clickable. They come in different formats, right? One that denotes delete, outlines, one that doesn't appear to be a button until you hover over it, a link format, little underline that you notice for a lot of things, potential icons, right, instead of just having full words, text. Very useful. There's plenty of different types of components here, a lot of them of which we're going to be using within this project, and so Shadcn is going to be a really great tool for us to use, so let's get it installed. One of the things that I did before just jumping into, and well, we'll go into installation here, but I toggled this panel here to just bring up our terminal. I have the bash terminal here. It's just a useful way to be able to install Shadcn without shutting down our production server here. Remember that we're running this create next app, and you know, I could create more terminals up in the top here to be able to do it, but really sometimes when I'm using Shadcn, you know, it's better, or whatever library really that I want to use, better to leave the production server running, right? We have hot reload here where if we make a change over here, we just kind of refresh this, let that other terminal keep running our server, add any installations in here as needed, right? So we are working with NextJS. Here's some other frameworks that are existing out there, but personally I like using NextJS, and that's what we're using for this tutorial, so let's use that. So cool. So Shadcn actually had an update. So it used to have like this little npx Shadcn-UI at latest. They've changed it, so for some people who are coming back, they did change that. But basically what you're doing, you're just copying this. There's a little convenient copy button here that you could also use if you'd like. But, you know, I just copy pasted it. It's all the same. So you just hit enter. As soon as you paste it in, it asks to install something. Y, then enter. And then it goes through and it asks you what style you would like to use, New York or default. So what does that mean? I mean, you can kind of take a look at it here, right? So this is the default style, and you can take a look at a bunch of different ones. Again, this is the URL here that you can peruse, change as much and customize as much of this as you'd like. This is the New York version. There's some like minor changes. You can see like some of the things are different sizes and whatever. Like for example, this cookie settings here. We're just gonna, well, I guess it's defaulting to New York style, a little bit of smaller text. Just because we have smaller real estate here, I don't actually know if any of the designs will be different between my source code and if I changed it. Usually, I think it's defaults literally to default, but it's choosing New York. So even from the time that I built my source code to now, there's some changes. But, you know, why not? Why don't we try New York, and we'll roll with any changes that are needed. So we'll take that. And again, the base color here, right, you can choose, what do they got? Neutral here. So this kind of black or white format. Gray is the next one. A little bluish gray, really. Stone, you got this brown, or brown, gray, I don't know. It's just darker gray, I guess. This is more of a bluish again. Full blue along the whole thing. And then this is really more gray. I mean, really, I think the regular colors are more interesting. But for the most part, I think that we're just going to use the black or white ones. You can always add in more of these colors later on as needed. But yeah, I think we're just going to use neutral. And then CSS variables for theming, yes. So we're just going to grab all that stuff in there. We're adding Shadcn, so unfortunately your thing is going to break until it fixes itself at the end of this. So now it's added a couple of things, right? This Tailwind config, but more interesting, this library folder with utils.ts. This is a reason why I started using source as opposed to just straight up app here. Just because I like having the lib, which has nothing, this library folder, sorry, that's what lib stands for, with the utils, right, which has a convenient file here where you can add a bunch of different functions like cn here, which we'll be using later on. This stuff doesn't really appear within our app, and so that's why I kind of want to keep it separate. It's still within our source folder, and has all of our, which has all of our code in it that we regularly edit, but it doesn't really appear in our app, so I personally don't think that it belongs in there. Cool. So for right now, we don't really have any of our components, and remember that I said I'd like to get the button component. So how do I get the button component in there? Well, here's the command here. So if you just scroll to any of the different components, I just happen to choose button. If you just scroll down, here's the little instructions for installation. You can just copy this. I'm using NPM. You can use whatever package manager you want. NPM is the default one, usually installed with most terminals. So I'm just going to use that. Again, you can just copy paste this, but here, npx shadcn at latest add button. So we'll just hit enter there. It's going to take a little bit of time to install, but not too much. And now, if we go back into our source, we can see that it added a components folder here, right? Within this components folder, it has a nested UI folder with a buttons file that it's added. And there's a bunch of code here, right? But all that, this code, you don't really have to worry about it too much. But if we went back to, let's just say, our landing page here, and how do I want to do this? Like, how about this? We'll keep the div, and in fact, why don't we create the centered effect again? So items-center. I like to keep my Tailwind in alphabetical order. It drives me crazy. Some people who just throw stuff in willy-nilly. I like having mine in ABC order, so you'll see me try to keep it that way. We will add in our button. And remember to add it in from the @/component/UI/buttons, which is what was added here, and not this radix UI button. Just because sometimes it doesn't seem to be having the radix UI one, but sometimes in some of the other components, it'll pop up and say @radix UI and default to that one as opposed to the one that's been added by Shadcn. It's just because Shadcn is built on top of radix UI that it needs to install it, but there isn't really an elegant way yet to be able to do that. But again, if we just hit enter there, make sure that we're importing button from this one and not the Radix UI one, we'll have the right one. If we just created a button here and just said go to home here, and we go back to our landing page, which is just slash, nothing else extra there. You can see we have go to home. Some of the things that you might have noticed inside of this button is that there's different variants, right? Default, destructive, outline, secondary, ghost, and link, which if we remember going through earlier, right? Primary, secondary, destructive, outline, ghost, and link. We can choose whichever one we like. The way that we set it is by doing variant here. It doesn't need the curly brace, defaults to that, but I personally don't, it's not needed. So if we add destructive here, right, for example, just because it's the most visually apparent that it's different, right, it's a red button, usually used for things like delete, right, it's basic design cue that, hey, red, we got to be careful with a red button, right, so, you know, that's what that's typically used for, right? If we have outline, kind of barely see it there. It's not the most readily apparent. But let's just say, like, hey, I don't like how this thing is. The outline is so thin. I go back in here, and I can look for outline here. I can see border. And what if I just wanted the border to be of 2, right? It thickens the border a little bit. I don't know if you saw that. It's a little bit of a minor detail there, but if you, and let me just zoom in really close so that you can really see the difference there, right? 2 versus nothing, right? So, I mean, it's 1 pixel versus 2 pixels, so I don't know, maybe let's do 5. Is it because there's only a specific amount of numbers. I'm just gonna use, let me see, does this show? It doesn't show there, but just experiment, you know, if it's 10, it doesn't show, does 8 show? Yep, it does, right? Maybe it's because if the border goes a little bit beyond 8, it starts smushing into the text, so that's why they don't want to have it. But you can have border of 1 if you'd like, but, you know, border of 2, a little bit thicker, so that if we go back to 100%, it's a little bit more apparent that there's an outline here as opposed to nothing, right? Depends on your preference. I personally like it to have 2, and just showing how I can easily go back into my buttons component here and change things as I kind of need it. You can see how there's also like a BG background here. Let's just say, like, I like sky of 100, right? A sky blue, right? You can see there, I just kind of added it, right? And I think, you know, there's a hover here, a BG of accent. So if you hover over it, it turns into this white. What if I don't really like that. What if I made this a little bit darker so that when we hovered over it, it can get a little bit lighter. So right now, sky of 500, darker blue. If we hover over it, it's a lighter blue. So that's, you can see how I can customize it in any particular way, depending on the style guide or design guide that you want to create, if you want to use it. Otherwise, we can just go back and change everything back to the way that it was, right? I'm just going to make that change to a border of 2, so it's more readily apparent in the outline part there, that, you know, that the border of the outlined button is a little bit thicker than the default. Another thing that I often sometimes do is, you know, you see on a lot of links, right, it's a blue link, but as you can see within this, it's a white link by default, so sometimes I might turn text primary into sky blue. I'll just leave it the way that it is. I rarely use link, unless it's like an inline text link thing, but, you know, if we ever need it, we can always come back to here and change it. Other things here, we also have sizing here, and, you know, for a lot of these, right, it's already preset. Icon, height of 9, you know, that can work for the most part, right? Large, you have a taller height, and you have padding on either side. Small, like slightly smaller height, right? Smaller padding on either side, so you can create it. You can see how, right, there's slight differences between each of the particular ones. You just choose the one that works for you. So let's just say, like, I wanted the size to be large here, right? A little bit of extra on either side. Height, right? You can see 10 compared to 9, not too much of a difference. You know, if I wanted to be astronomically different, right, 20, then I'll see that a lot more vertical space than before. But let's just keep it to 10, the way that it naturally is. But you can always go back in and change it as needed. Cool. Okay, so we want to navigate to the home page, right? One of the ways in which we can do that is by turning this button into a link. So we're just gonna, well, I'll leave it here and just create it up here. We're gonna use something called link, and look, there's a lot of different links here. The one that we want is next/link here, which is just a wrapper, as you can see here, a component that extends the A tag. So if you're familiar with HTML, the A tag, which is usually used for links, right? You can even see Copilot helping us out here by providing us the code for that. We don't need that part though, Copilot. What we need is to just push this up here, right? Copy paste it, or just retype it or whatever. But ultimately, we want it to look like this. We're just wrapping this button that we have here with this link, and if we click on it, we get to the home page. Wonderful. And let's just say we copy paste this into our home page here. It can't find these links and these buttons because we haven't imported them. So usually what I do often when I copy paste stuff and I need to find the new import, just remove one letter from it and it'll pop up all of the autocomplete options. And we're just finding, again, the next/link one. And then the button here, right? Pulling it from @/components here. Cool. And let's just say, look, we wanted it to be an icon, right? And we, whoops, whoa. Whoops. Icon was in size. Sorry. We don't want it to have text in it. What if we wanted to use the actual link from Lucid React? Why is this not? Right. So we have the link too. So the reason that before Lucid React appeared for link as the first option over next/link, once we imported link here in this way, it kind of had a name collision. So that's why it has this kind of link to. If you really wanted that first link for whatever reason, you can do import. I believe what we're going to do, what is it? Link Lucid React. It's going to say an error, right? Because we have a duplicate thing, but you can say as link icon, right? And so what we can do is just call link icon down here, right? If you really wanted this type of link as opposed to, this horizontal link. I don't know what that link is. Oh, right. It's not the Lucid React link. Off. Okay. So, right. If we wanted that one for whatever reason, right? You can see there, we added a little button. And we don't have that centered div. So if we just, again, copied this part in here, tabbed this thing over so it looks nice, and then add this part in here, right? We've centered it, so you can see that little portion there. And hey, by the way, you can also just say, go to landing, right? And it'll add that. Doesn't fit within the icon, unfortunately, because again, remember, in our icons, height of 9, width of 9, it's forced that way. So unfortunately, it's kind of pushing things around, right? So if we just go back to large, right, we have these two things together. They look a little bit smushed, so one of the ways that we can fix that is by adding a class name to our link icon and adding a margin left of 2 and kind of pushing these two things apart. Cool. And if we click on this, whoops, we need to change this to home, or back to our slash, right, back to the landing page. So when we click it, it goes back to this landing page. Remember, with the go to home, goes to the home. So that's the basics for Shadcn and our app-based navigation in Next. One last little education bit here. Before we actually go and create the email editor that'll really form the main basis for the campaign experience within Poke CRM inside of this Mailchimp inspired platform. We want to be able to create a way for us to retrieve user inputs, right? We've already been introduced to the button that allowed for us to navigate between different pages. Now we need to be able to allow for someone to type stuff in. And thankfully, in Shadcn, and I'm just going to go over to the docs real quick, we have different types of ways to do that. So we have in little form input here, we have an actual form component that's based off of React Hooks form, a library. So, there's a bunch of code here. So we're going to put a couple of these pieces together, a form input, a text area, which is a little bit larger than a text input. You can resize it and, have more space to put a full email message, which will be useful in the future. But really, to get into like using all of these individual pieces, I think it'd be a good idea to kind of take a look at maybe the input field and how we can start working with the input components. So inside of themes here, we can see a quick example, right? There's a little authorization example here to create an account. And again, we're probably just going to be doing in the actual platform using GitHub and Google to do it. But we'll just create like a little fake login, right? With inputs and the buttons here, the create account button, to just showcase how we can use Shadcn components to create a little form. And we're going to use basically the same principles that we're learning from this form to create the email editor. So let's get started. In our code here, and I've kind of collapsed everything and got rid of a lot of the pieces within the code editor just so we can start from scratch. I think that just because we're going to like showcase some of the features here in Shadcn, we're not going to be creating something that's going to be there permanently in the app. I think we can just use our landing page here so that when we start up our server and, just go to localhost 3000, we'll get to see right off of the bat, our little, mock login form here. So what we're going to do is first remove this bit here. And, we'll keep this bit, this piece of Tailwind CSS here. We'll just have this centered on the screen. We'll probably need to also think about what are the different pieces that make up this component. And it won't be exact. I don't know exactly what they're using. But what it looks like to me is some form of card, right, that creates this kind of background here. Some text, right, which doesn't require an extra Shadcn component. 2 buttons, which we already have. This little bar right here, which in Shadcn is called a separator. So we'll have a separator here in a row container with some text in the middle and a little bit of padding in between. So we're just going to take note of that. We have a little label here that goes on top of an input field. We have a placeholder bit of text here for the email, no placeholder text for the email portion, and then some form of, account creation here. We're not going to need this stuff for now, so we'll just remove it to make it as clean as possible. And now we want to make sure within our, so this is the home screen, right? So actually we can, funnily enough, use this button here. Go back to the landing page, see that it's fully empty, just the way that we expected. If we write hello world here in the middle, we'll see it appear. So we know that we're working within the right page here. So we'll go back into components here. And since we said earlier, right, in our themes here, that we needed a card component, we'll go down here. We'll take a look at the card, see how it looks here. Looks like something that was being used in that little example there. So we're going to go down here. We're going to copy the command here, paste it into our terminal here, and get card installed. There were also a couple of other things that were in the themes that we were going to need. we're going to need an input. So we'll just add this. And before I hit enter, I'll just grab all of the components that we need so that we don't have to just do a bunch of these commands over and over and over again. We will need the separator here, which is this little bar here. They're both horizontal and vertical. So we will be using the horizontal one as seen in the example. We don't actually need that. We just need this separator here so we can provide space separated different components that we'll need. We'll need the form eventually, but for this example, you know what? We'll add in the form and make this a full form. Boom. So we'll use form, input, and separator. I'll go back to this just to check. We already have the buttons. We have the separator that we need here. We have the card to create this little background here. And we have the inputs and the forms. Now, sometimes when you install stuff in Shadcn, it doesn't know which order you've added them in. So sometimes you'll notice here, right, button.tsx already exists. Would you like to overwrite? I believe that that's a part of form. Might be a part of input, but I'm pretty sure it's a part of form that it'll ask. Usually we don't want to overwrite it for the most part. So we'll skip that, but we'll add in form.tsx, tsx, input.tsx, separator, label.tsx, etc., etc. If you go into your components here, it already pre-opens in VS Code your UIs folder. You'll see the button, card, form, input, label, and separator. So we have all of the different pieces that we can use to create our application. Now, if we go back to card here, we can actually see this little bit of code to kind of see we want this like little border feature here, the card, and we kind of want this title and kind of subtitle here. And then we'll also need the input. So just kind of taking a look at the code here. Here are all the imports. So we'll pull all the imports that we need for this example. So we need our button. We need a couple things from card. So we need the actual card component. We need card contents, card description, card footer, whoops, with an F, footer there, card header, and again, I like putting stuff in ABC order. It drives me crazy when some people don't put their things in ABC order. I personally like to do so. And card title. You can see that they kind of put them all on a different line just because, you know, this is taking up half the screen. It's a little bit smushed, but usually I like to try to keep things on the same line as much as possible. It's just a personal preference. You can put them all down, you know, on their own separate line. Each of these components, like Shadcn, if you'd like. For inputs, it's a little bit harder on this input because I don't know if I can see it. So instead, I'm just going to write it out instead of finding it, or have Copilot auto-complete it for me. Yep, add/component/UI/inputs. Honestly, you could also just copy-paste it, right, from their example here. And again, if you're using autocomplete, you could just use it to autocomplete it. But sometimes you might import the wrong thing. So, you know, sometimes when I'm not being lazy, I will write all of this stuff out just to make sure that I've imported the correct things. We're not actually using select, so I already autopiloted and started importing stuff that we're not needing. Select, if you were wondering, was just this kind of drop-down menu. In that login, we didn't have a drop-down menu, so we don't need to use it. Back to the code. So we're going to create a card. So we're going to add it in, just this card here, and it's going to have some styling, and we're going to explicitly say that it is 350 pixels wide. So you can see there we have the width of 350 pixels. When we put it within these square brackets and specify px, we're declaring it instead of using, you know, those numbers just by its base. It's a preset number. By using this square brackets notation, we can declare explicitly what pixel values we want. Cool. So we're going to use a card header here and have some things within it. We're going to have a card title, which, let's take a look at the example here. Create an account. We're just going to copy that, put that in here. We're going to have a card description here, and we're just going to copy this chunk in here. Back to our card example here. So just like they did, the title, the description. We're going to leave our card header here, so not inside of the card header. Whoops. But outside of it, we're going to create a card contents. And they have a little form here. We could use the form that we installed earlier. I don't think that it's needed just because we're not going to put any actual functionality in there just yet. We can create a full div. What are they doing? Okay, I see what they're doing here. Okay, yeah, we can do something similar there. So we can use a grid, gap of 4. So if we do, you might have seen me use gap X earlier for creating a gap horizontally. When you use gap of 4, you know, you're providing spacing in between different components in both the vertical and horizontal direction. So sometimes if I'm aligning things vertically, I'll often just do gap of Y. If I'm aligning things next to each other horizontally, then I'll do gap of X. They're deciding to do gap of 4, which is, you know, what they're doing. I'm not going to change too much in that example. So, yeah. So we're going to do this here. So we're going to create a little grid, and then we're going to create the first element of our grid here by creating a little column, right? And he's going to do space Y of 1.5. That's sounds reasonable. We're going to use one of the labels. We're going to have the email. Sure, that sounds reasonable. And then we're going to have our input component that we've already brought along here. So the label and input from here. ID of email. Type is not needed, but we will need the placeholder. So, you know, example or e@example.com. Right, so just some form of thing to give someone the indication, and then we can just copy paste this and just write password, right? Put password here, and then there was no placeholder for the password. So cool. If we go into our website, we can see there's our version. They're using dark mode, so that's why it's black with white text. This instead is white with black text. Again, if you know, I can zoom it in just so it's a little bit easier to see. You can see that it's fully centered within this browser window. And we have our card here. We have our header. We have the title. You can see the difference. Card title, it's a little bit bolded. Card description, it's a little lighter and is not bolded. And then we have our label, which has the bold color, but not within the font size, not bolded. So it's a little bit smaller, but more, you know, it's just black color. So it stands out against the subtitle here. We have our placeholder. We have all that bit. The only last part, and I believe, let's see if they, how did they do it? Oh, they put it within a footer. That's cool. I agree. That would be a good way of doing it. And we'll just have a sign up button here. So if we go back to this, we have our little sign up button here. We'll go back to themes. Oh, yep. Of course, we've forgotten those two buttons there. So a way that we can do that, if I take a look at this and investigate, I can probably put it within the contents, have it in its 2 row containers, one for the button and one for this UI bit here. So we're going to create 2 of those. So we'll create 2 divs here, here and here, just so that we remember to do so. We'll have flex row, width of full, and we're gonna have justify between, so that we can have those two buttons justified in between. We're gonna have two buttons, right? One is for GitHub, and then one is for Google. Let's go back to the website just to make sure it looks right. No, actually, I don't like how I did that. So instead, we're going to just use gap x of 2 and have these buttons, class name of width dash full. Will that help? Yep. So if I make both of them width dash full, they'll take up about the same amount of real estate. And we're going to create, well, actually, we can use gap of 2 here. Oh, no. Gap, we'll use mx of 2. Oh, that's weird. Why won't this separate? Oh, sorry. My of 2. Right, and that's how we have that spacing. I don't like how it's spaced on the top, so instead I'll just do mb of 2, so create margin bottom of 2. We'll copy paste this portion here. So what we're going to use and add to this is our separator. Separator. Is it not appearing? So we're going to need that. Thank you, Copilot. So we'll need it from /components, our separator. We're actually going to have 3 bits here. Oh, wow, look at that. They have it for us already. We don't need it to be a span. We'll just need it to be an H1 here. Honestly, well, actually, this is not that bad. What was the actual word that they used? Or continue with. So we'll have that. We'll add that in there. And what did I do here? Let's see. I don't think this width dash full is correct there, Copilot. So let's see. What did I do wrong here? Show. If I just created a width of explicitly just like 50 pixels. There we go. And we will need them to be vertically aligned. So I believe that that is justify center. Oh, whoops. Well, let's see. I'll be right back. Okay, so I fixed it. It was just because we want to specify 50 for both of these, and also center, do items center. So flex row, gap x of 2, item center, justify center. So everything is centered within a little box here. If you kind of want a deeper understanding, you go into inspect element here, and just kind of break down the pieces here. We're really focused on the body because that makes up most of our website. You can see here, right, when we added the individual stylings of the website here. This is our component here. You can see there's a little margin bottom of 2. You can see it with the little orange underneath it. And within our piece here, right, we added margin bottom of 2. You can see that there's a little like square outline there around. So we just wanted to say that within it, we're centering things not just vertically but horizontally, right? So that everything appears in the way that it does. So there's that. And if you were interested in changing the color, like maybe this gray is not as apparent for you. Let's see, there's BG-border. So if we did BG-black, right, it would make it a little bit more darker, right? You can change it to whatever color you want, gray-500, if it's so that it's the same color as the text, right? Text gray of 500, so it's the same there. Let's just look at this theming a little bit here to see what's different. Okay, so they use outlines and then made it so we'll just change that real quick just to make it match. Outline, right? So it looks similar to the way, just inverted the colors there. And we'll need a little logo. So we could use the icon library that comes with it, and you might have seen it pop up a couple times in the auto imports there, Lucid React. So I could try to use the GitHub icon from Lucid React, but I don't really want to. I don't really like these, and also you can see that they look deprecated because they're crossed out, right? So instead, we're going to download a library that has these icons already. So the one that we're going to use is react-icons. So we're going to do npm install react-icons. So while that is installing, I will bring it up. And nice of it to pull up. So if you see here, there's a bunch of different icons that we can have used here, right? And like, let's say if I wanted to look up like a GitHub one, I would say, okay, that looks like a good GitHub icon that I'd want to use. And then it lets me know, okay, you can pull it from this import here. So if we add this import, and I'll add it to the top just because I like to separate out the difference between @/components. You know, this tells me that these are Shadcn imports. This is an actual different library. So if we pull this, we can use this component as their, put in the sample code here, FA GitHub, and we'll just add a little margin so we separate out the icon from the text. So if we go back there, see, we have a nice little GitHub icon separated from the text here, right? And then we'll just grab the Google one, so we can just go back, look up Google, right? Find a nice Google icon here, the same exact library. You can just pull that there, add it in, and then add in FA Google, class name, the styles, margin right of 2, there, and there we go. Looks pretty similar, doesn't it? And also with our sign up button, I know it says create account here, so we can add in a class name of with-full, so it takes up the whole bottom, and then variant of outline, so that it has that look. Honestly, in some ways, just because there's a separator here, so these can look in this way, it looks a little bit too similar, like the inputs here. It's a little bit of a thicker border. Yeah, they had this one be solid, so it's not actually outline. So that actually makes sense there. So full black button there, but these two, they have a little bit of separation from the rest of the login. So, these can look apparent like buttons, right? This is the primary action for adding these logins. So cool. That's kind of the replication of this example here within Shadcn. We're learning how to use more of these Shadcn components to create UI elements that we like, whether it's from a wireframe or we see something interesting from a website. We can just kind of break down, okay, this looks like a card. This is like the parts of a card, right? Some form of title and description. Okay, these are buttons. They're oriented within a row with each other inside of a container. Okay, there are 3 pieces here, 2 separators with a piece of text in the middle. They're all within the same container here, div, in a row configuration, right? These are all within a grid. This label and this input, they're also, within a container, in a column container here. And so that's just kind of how we can break down different pieces of UI that we need to create, use the pieces that were already created for us within Shadcn, and then execute it within the code so that we can have it within our website. Awesome. Next, let's build our email editor. Okay, with that, we're ready to jump into the actual meat and potatoes and start working on an email editor that we can use to create really great programmatically sent emails through our email platform that we're going to create. When we create an email campaign, we're going to be able to schedule a lot of these automated emails and be able to send them out to different contacts that we'll save within the contacts portion of the platform. So given that, we've already gotten to learn how to use the card, the buttons, the inputs, even the separators. For the most part, we're still going to be using a lot of those individual pieces in order to create our email client. We'll also be using the React hooks form, which is a part of the Shadcn components offering. We're going to be using both React hooks form and Zod. Zod, which we'll be going over more in depth later, will be more towards like validating user input. But yeah, forms are pretty they're really complicated, more than you might think, just because a lot of the things that we interact with in life are based off of forms. And funnily enough, right, this email client that we're creating, well, really underneath the hood, aren't most email clients just fancified forms, right? We're just filling out different parts, whether it's a larger text area for the full message, attaching our, attachments and various other things like filling in your, who you're sending it to, who the people you're CCing to, BCC, etc., etc. All those are basically just forms. So that's what we're going to be using underneath the hood to create our little email client. This is the basic anatomy here that Shadcn has provided to explain what a form is, right? There's the outer form component. There are various different form fields that can be put within a form. There's going to be a control, name being each individual part of the form. We'll go more into that when we discuss Zod. There are things that we render out, a form item, which may have a label. Form control, which is just what are the actual pieces in which the user is touching. And we're not really going to be using description and message, but those are the things that you could optionally add as needed, right? So, they're providing a little example here. What we're going to be more focused on is starting and creating our form schema. So we're just going to follow this tutorial pretty closely. And we can start here in the landing page, but at some point we're going to remove it because obviously we're not going to do emails on the landing page, but we're just going to use it just so that we can see it more simply within our app here. So first we're going to need to create a form schema. So actually, you know what? Actually, I've changed my mind. What we're going to do is actually add in a thing that I was going to add in later, but honestly, sitting here and looking at the sample code that I've written for myself, I think it makes more sense if we introduce this now. So we're going to create a new folder here at the source level, right? Notice that we're not putting it inside of app. We're going to create something called features. And, for our platform and for our product, when we add different features and, creating being able to write and create an email is a feature of our platform. We're going to include it within the features portion of our code base. And what we're going to do is create a folder inside of features called email. And inside of email, we're going to create a components folder, right? So we're going to create a component named email dash, we could call it form, right? We can call it email dash client, whatever you want to name it. I'll name it email form, just to remind me that this one is using Shadcn's form component. So first, we're going to create a use client for our email because we're going to be using some state management. And in NextJS, we're going to need to specify use client if we're going to do some state management. One of the things that we're going to do is import Z from Zod, and I'll put it in the description if you want to read more about Zod, right? Just Zod, let's see, here it is, Zod.dev, right? And you'll have the full documentation. You can have a look at all of the different pieces of it, right? You can see the ways in which, that's weird, we're going to see the ways in which we're going to do user validation with Zod here, right? So z.number greater than 5, that's making sure that, whatever information we have here It's greater than 5, greater than equal to, GTE, LTs, less than, right? So on and so forth. Numbers, dates, enumerated values, enums, lots of different things, right? So we'll be using those to validate our entry to make sure that the user is putting in the right information that we need. Whoops. Form schema. So I'm just copying down this portion here. We're going to use z.object to create it. We're going to open this up, and we're going to add some different pieces to it. So the first part is we need to think about who we're sending this from, right? Ourselves. So we're going to provide a from name, right? And, you know, whether you want to consider this like the signature block or something, you know, we're just going to provide who we're sending this to, right? So if it's me, it's G. G is sending you an email, right? And we're going to specify that what we're sending is a string. And remember, a string is just any series of letters, right, put together. It's a string. And we're going to specify that we're going to have a minimum string of 1 so that we don't enter in an empty string. You know, a person's name should be at least 1 letter. So we'll put it as a minimum of 1 letter. We could also put in here an ABC order other than the string. We can specify a max, right? We can say 255 characters. If you go beyond that, I don't think most people's names are that long. So we'll have that. Shadcn or Copilot, we are not going to provide a from email. We don't need that yet. What we're going to need is a message. We can provide it. I will agree with Copilot for that. We can provide a max of 5,000 and a minimum of 1, right? We don't want to send in any empty message. Actually, I have sent empty messages in email. You know what? That's a design decision of whether or not you want to allow people to send an empty email. Sometimes I've sent an empty email to myself because I just want to send an attachment to myself. So I'll specify that you need to, you know what? Just because I've convinced myself, write an email with a minimum message length of 0. See, we're being agile and flexible with our code. We're going to z.string, and here we're going to specify that we're looking for an email. So this will check whether or not it's a valid email. And we need to provide a name. Who are we sending this to, right? We, you know, in Gmail and in other email clients, they don't usually ask for this. But, you know, just for us, we want to send out personalized emails. We'll have the name of who we're sending it to. So we'll just provide it so that instead of writing hello to their name, you know, their full email, we'll actually be able to send it to, you know, hello, you know, dear John, dear Jane, whomever will be able to do that. So cool. That first part, we're just creating our schema here, and we're going to export it as a type. You'll see why later on that we're going to need to have it. But we'll just do z.infer type, whoops, we need that angle brackets, type of form schema that we just created. So we're creating basically a type here, right, that later on we're going to be able to reference through and make sure in a type-safe format that we send through, you know, our email values. So as we're writing it in code, we'll just make sure that we have from name, message, to email, and to name. And all of these are strings that we've specified here, right? And we've had our error checking for minimum, maximum length, email, all that type of stuff. Next, we're actually going to need to create our email form component here. So we're just going to create it as an arrow function. By the way, you know, this is an arrow function. My personal preference is to use email, you know, arrow functions. You could technically, you know, create email form function in this way. Both are equivalent, right? Both of these are the exact same, but I personally like to use arrow functions. It's just a personal preference. Both of them should be exactly the same. So if we move on, there's some extra stuff here that's going to be needed that we're going to be adding into our imports. And thankfully, they've highlighted it so that we can remember it. So we're going to need import, and I'll put it above in ABC order, use form from React hooks form. So that's the correct import. Just wanted to double check and make sure. And I usually, again, if I see like at something, I try to separate it out, whether it's the Shadcn component, at components, or in the future, if we're going to be pulling email forms, I just want to separate it out from explicit libraries, right, with no at symbols. I like to separate them out. So what we're going to do is just add the Zod resolver, and there's no auto import there. So instead, we're just going to type it in at hook forms /resolvers/Zod. So cool. All of it's auto completing, so that means it's all found. So again, we just added in Zod resolver, used form here. We're going to add in our form. So we're down to this portion here. You can see even for them, they've added in little error checks here. They've actually added an error message. I haven't done that with this example just because, just like if you created an error within an email client, it doesn't write it in line with the inputs necessarily. I mean, we could add it in the future if we want to, but for now, we're just trying to get the core functionality down. So we're going to add that. We can also rewrite z.infer type of form schema here, or conveniently, I've just wrapped it up into email form values, right? So that, you don't have to write this again. It also makes it easier to read than writing out full z.infer type of form schema, right? You're just saying you're using this form, and the type that we want it to be is of our email form values, right? Which are what we specified here. Cool. So we're going to do it, write a parentheses and a curly brackets there. I'm going to put default values because, again, I adhere to ABC order. And yes, we're just going to, for now, actually, I'll do it in a second. So I'll actually do this right now. We're going to create an interface here where we're going to provide props to this. So in order to use this email form, it would be suggested that we provide some form of default values, which are of type email form values. There. In my source code, I made it as optional. I think I'm going to keep it to optional because you could potentially provide it or not. So what we're going to do is just add in default values to our props object here and destructure it, and then say that it is of email form props. Make sure it's not email form values, because then that would cause an error, right? If you do values, then it's going to be like default values is not part of email form values, right? Which makes sense. So instead, we need our email form props, destructuring it to grab the default values. Basically, what we're going to just do is we either have default values, in which we're going to set the default values within this use form here to be default values. Otherwise, if we don't have it, then we're going to set it to our hard-coded default values here of just empty string for everything. Cool. Then we need a resolver here, and we're going to use the Zod resolver that we imported, and we're going to pass in our form schema, this Zod object, right? So that's going to be put in there. Super. Awesome. Submit handler. What I'm actually going to do, instead of defining it with an email form, just because we want to be able to reuse email form potentially throughout different parts of our website, we don't want to hard code into our email form a submit, just because you might be submitting and doing different things with the result of the email form. So instead, what we're going to do is just create an onSubmit function that'll be part of our props, and say that it will receive values that we will be passing in, email values here, and then provide void here. Cool. And then we're going to do is, in case that we need, in case we're doing something, right, like submitting an email, right, and actually sending it, we don't want people to send multiple emails just because, you know, it's loading and they press the button again. We want to be able to disable it while it's sending so that, you know, if someone accidentally double clicks a button or whatever, it's disabled, so it's not going to send multiple emails. Cool. All right. Next step, we're actually going to need to build our form. So we can just copy this, and I will change my little personal hang up here of having everything on its own line. Instead, I'm just gonna bring this all on the same line. Oh my goodness. So there's that. Form items, form label, form message, and everything appears to be in ABC order already. So cool. We'll just add semicolons here. If you see, sometimes semicolons are optional in JavaScript, but for me, it's just, again, another personal preference thing. Semicolons will always terminate a line, so if you see a semicolon, that means that line has ended. There's no wraparound like you see here. There's no semicolon here, so that means that this line continues, or potentially can continue. So that's why I like adding in semicolons into everything. It tells me, okay, this was the start of the statement. I haven't seen a semicolon, no semicolon. I've seen a semicolon, so I know for sure that this is the end of that statement. So, just a little personal preference. Some people like to have them, some people don't. Okay, so we're going to create our form here. So again, with that login example that we did earlier, technically we could have wrapped it within a form to actually give it functionality. I was more concerned about actually having the UI down and just, again, showcasing a way to use those Shadcn components. So, you know, that's just something that personal preference, or not personal preference, but I decided not to bog the login example down with the forms, because as you can see, it's getting a little bit complicated. So what we can do here, right, is add our on submit, right? So if we add in destructure and add in disabled and on submit, which we've declared within our props, what we can do here is add our on submit. We're going to do form.handle submit with on submit. Again, they declared theirs within the email form. I'd much prefer an email form to be dedicated only to the purpose of getting in the user import and then passing on those email form values to the on submit to allow for the parent component of the email form to handle it. So that's just my personal convention, and I think that in trying to make email form as reusable as possible, this makes the most sense. So we're going to create a form field, not a form item, as Copilot was suggesting. We're going to do control equals form.control. So again, you could have copy pasted this. I'm going to write it all out. So the name, right? So this is saying that this form field is connected to one of the form schema values. So in this case, we're just going to start with from name. So this is you providing your signature, right? And we're going to render out. And this gets a little complicated, so maybe you want to copy paste this portion, but it's curly braces, parentheses, curly braces, field here. And then inside of this, between this parentheses and this curly brace, we're going to provide an arrow. So we're going to create an arrow function here. Do parentheses, because all we're doing is just returning. There's not going to be any functionality that we're adding to necessitate curly braces. So we're just going to create form items here inside of these angle brackets, right? So these are components. So we're going to provide a label here, and we can just write, this is you, right? So provide your name. You can actually just write that, your name here. We're going to do a form control. So this is what the user is actually going to be interacting with. Input. We're going to spread the values of field here as props into the input. And then we're going to provide a... Nope, we're not going to need a placeholder. We're just going to disable. Set disabled to disabled. I mean, you could provide, again, like that placeholder of your name, but I think it's beating someone over the head with that, right? They have a little description here. I don't really think that we need to provide too much more elaboration to your name. But if you want to, you can certainly add in a description as needed. This form message here, right? So they specified an error message here. So, you know, if there was some form of an error, it would appear within there. You could add it. I personally am not, but if you wanted to, you could provide a little message, you know, hey, you've exceeded the maximum, you know, in the same way that they've done it for the minimum here, right? Username must be at least 2 characters. You could do that if you want. I'm just not going to for this tutorial. Personal preference. Form field here. So we're going to do basically the same thing, and honestly I could, and for the next one I'll copy paste it, but I'll just write it all out just so that we can feel included in that. Honestly, I did it a different way. I put it all within a column, but I'm actually going to put them in a little row. So if we go to our page here and we actually remove everything here that was related to the login. So here we had our login here. If we go all the way down to this card, remove it all, be back to an empty screen, and we're just going to add in our email form. And when we do that, and just remove everything else here, make it look as simple as possible. We need to do an onSubmit. So onSubmit was the only required one. We'll just do an empty arrow function for now, just so that we clear up that error. Let's see here. Event handlers cannot be passed to a client. Components props. Converting part of this. Oh, I see. So this needs to be a use client when we're doing that. So there we go. We can see that we have our username here. We have our input field here, right? And actually, I can do something really easy to just showcase that it's working, right? I can just do a console log and just print out values so that we can see it. Okay, so we're going to add a button as well to allow for us to do an easy submit. And I know I'm leaving that div there hanging. We'll get back to it in just a second, just so we test to make sure that all of the form information is correct. In order to submit, so since we're only submitting this from name field, we should remove all of these. We'll just comment them out. So if you hit Control/ on your keyboard, it's the same key as with the question mark. You'll be able to do an easy comment. If not, just write these slashes. That basically just tells, NextJS, the framework, to ignore these lines. So we comment them out. That's just the common convention there, programming convention. So another thing that I noticed, right, is that if we go out to 100%, right, the way that the user would usually see this, you can see that it's kind of tiny in the middle of the screen. So one of the ways in which we can fix that is by going into and creating a div here, and just specifying, right, that maybe we're going to have this be width of px, and we'll just give this flex, and you know, you might have the form alongside other components, so we'll just call it flex column for now. And what happened here? Oh, I used pixels instead of percentage, right? Percentage, there we go. So that you can see, no matter what our screen size is, right, if we were to, pull this over left, right, you can see that it resizes to fit. So all looks good. And yeah, don't make a mistake like I did. Make sure that you use percentages when you want percentages and pixel values when you want pixel values. So you can see 50px is pretty squished. Yeah, so let's make sure that we tighten up on that type of stuff. So cool. We have all of these contained here. So in order to see the console log, I'll just full screen this, open up my inspect element, go over to our console here. In case you don't see it, just because maybe something else is defaulted up there, it might be in this plus right here, more tools. But if not, you'll just look for this little icon, and if you hover over it, you'll see console there. If you just click it, you'll see a bunch of this stuff. You can remove it by just clearing the console here with this little arrow. And so if we hit test here real quick, we submit, we can see there, right, from name test, right, which is what we expect to get from our values, right? Initially, it's set to an empty string, but once we provide an input and we hit submit, that's what's submitted. And you can see that we can do stuff outside of the email form. The email form is only there to get the information from the user. It allows for us to allow for parent components of the email form component to dictate what is actually happening with those values, right? Whether it's just to print them on the screen, save them to a database, send it as a part of an email, whatever the use case is, we just want to make sure that we have a little bit of separation. It's just something that you'll get used to over time, where you say, okay, this email form, it's great. I want to drop it around in different components, different pages, right? But I don't want it to do the exact same thing every single time. Well, this gives us the flexibility to be able to do that. Great. So basically, we can now just go in and finish this up. We know that it's working, so let's uncomment these components of the form elements of the form schema here. We have this div. What we can do is put it in a row. So flex row and gap x of 2 so that they're separated. And what we're going to do is just have two form fields. So we can copy, paste these, and make sure the tabbing style looks nice. And this one is going to be, let me look at the source code real quick. Yeah, so this is going to be the to name. So, you know, when you write your email and you'll have do whatever, dear, sorry, not do, dear whomever, right? This is going to control what that person's information is. We haven't changed from name, so you see that it keeps that value there. So we need to change this from to name here. Is to name, no, to name's in there. That was weird. Yeah, okay, that works. Sorry, the IntelliSense is confusing me a little bit, and what we need is this to be to email there, and then write to email, or yeah, to email here. You can see we have that. You might have noticed over here that the gap x of 2 here isn't being respected. These two things are kind of smushed right on top of each other. And honestly, if you kind of noticed, some of these aren't really spaced that correctly. And one of the reasons that is that this component here is inside of features. And if we look at our Tailwind config, which defines or really controls a lot of our styles here that are related to Tailwind specific macros, like gapx and you know, some of the other style snippets that they provide. One of the things you'll notice here, right, is that the naming or where the files in the folders are matters. And so, you know, since we put it out here in features, and Shadcn already created this components, we're not using the page router, so this really isn't used. But because the component lies outside of app, it hasn't been getting any styling. So all we needed to do, and Copilot does it very helpfully for us, if we add in features, you see there, we add a little gap there. If I zoom it in, you can see pretty apparently there's a gap now that we needed to add email forms in, because it's in its own feature /email/components directory folder. that we needed to provide it in here. And look, these stars just mean that it's a wildcard, right? Wildcard for directories and wildcards for files. So just so that we can find it no matter how far it's nested down within these folders. Okay, so for our last form field here, it doesn't actually have to be in the row here. We just wanted the row to put to name and to email along the same line. I just think that they're convenient to put together, just to have, you know, the person who you're sending it to, their name, and then the email that you want to send. You know, something pretty convenient there. I mean, people can probably write like dear whomever in the email, but just because we don't want to deal with like variable inputs within the actual editor itself, we'll have ways to control it inside of the framework that we're using to send emails. All we need to do is just specify the person's name here to actually have it included in the email after, you know, dear or to whom, whatever introduct or greeting you want to have with it. Totally fine there. We need to add a render, so I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff in. But for the message, right, when we put in message here, and just write like your message here, the inputs, unfortunately, if you're trying to write a long email, like putting it all in here, probably not the best. And so what we're going to actually do, we're going to need to download a new Shadcn component. And we're going to do Shadcn at latest add text area. And that's going to run. For some reason, it's asking to install the thing. Now we have our text area here. And so inside of our form control, we can just grab text area from our @/components /UI/text area. I'm just going to bring this up. Funnily enough, we don't need form description nor form message, so I'm actually going to remove that. And so, back to this. We could probably create, or actually add in a placeholder here and just write enter your email message here. Right, and close the quotes there. Just because this can get kind of long, I'll just put them all on their own line. There, and hit save. And is it not? Oh, there it is. So now you have this little inbox or message box here. You can make it as large as you want, although it might go off the screen there. But, you know, for a user, if they want to type in, you know, blah, 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 right, they have some pretty good space there. And you can see, right, it has a little scroll bar there for when the user, you know, starts typing in a little bit too much there. So cool. If you go to the Shadcn website, you can see ways to style the text area to the way that you want it. If you want it to only look different than these input areas, just for this tutorial, I'm probably not going to bother. But if you'd like to pretty it up, feel free to do so. Okay, so let's do the same test that we did earlier with the your name field, and just be able to do it for all of these fields together. And you can see with our onSubmit, we'll be able to console log them all out. So let's just expand this, open up our inspect menu, open up the console here, and just write in here your name. My name is G. Who am I sending it to? I'm going to be sending it to myself, and my email, you know, G at you know, me.com, right? Whatever test email. It's not actually going to send an email yet, so, you know, and just for a message, right? Quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Classic computer science debug message. So cool. When we hit submit, you can see we have here from name G, message here, quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The to email is g@me.com, and then myself. So great, we have all the framework for all the pieces that we'll need to be able to send an email. So in the next step, we'll create an account with email.js here, and use their SDK to be able to send emails, as they say, directly from our code. Let's get started. Okay, so here is the email.js documentation. Personally, I don't think they're that great, and you're welcome to go to this website and actually take a look at all of the pieces yourself. I personally think that they're not that great, so we're not going to use them for this tutorial. I just wanted to show it on screen just so that you know if you want to deep dive on all of the different things about email.js. You're welcome to do so. I personally am going to roll in this tutorial by just showing you within the console itself all the different steps to actually getting email service going. So to start off with, we're going to start when you create an account and log in. You're basically going to be greeted with this screen. We're going to start off with adding an email service. You see that I've already added one. I'll just go through the process of doing it again. So we have all of the different types of email services that you could potentially be using. You know, Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo are the pretty big major ones. You have some transactional ones like SendGrid, Amazon that I'm recognizing. But for the most part, you know, use Gmail. It's free. It's easy. You can create a new one that suits you. Or if you have a G Suite, if you have Outlook, then, good luck there. But, you know, you can just name it whatever you want. I just use the base name Gmail. You can be given a service ID. I'm going to get rid of all this later, so happy to show it. But, you know, when you connect an account, it's basically going to prompt you to log into one of your accounts here. Funnily enough, this is going to provide a little preview of what our own auth page will look like in the future. So we're just going to rely on the same auth that Google provides here. So you've probably seen it at a bunch of different websites, but I'm going to be using something similar here for this tutorial as well. So just a little sneak peek there. You can connect it. Once you connect it, you can see I've connected it to my work email here, right? And so, you know, you just save it. You'll get 500 emails per day. That's the limit that Gmail imposes. And remember in the pricing that it was 200 emails per month. And you can see right here, my reset time is on October 11th. Moving on from the service, so once you have your email service connected, you can go on to the template. So when you create a new template, this is basically what you're going to see. It automatically will put in an email in here. So this is the to email though, which is kind of weird. If you think about it, because why would you want to send an email to yourself? So really, you know, it should be in the from email. So as you can see here, when you use the default email addresses, right, email address, it's going to be the email that you connected in the email service. Create a subject line. For me, whenever I'm creating a template, just create a new template for every subject line that you want to use, every email. You know, messing around with variables for each of like the subject lines and adding more fields, it's kind of unwieldy. So, you know, especially for these automated campaigns, a lot of them are slight variations on each other. So, you know, just edit it here. It's a lot easier than, you know, mucking about it in the code. So there's that. I mean, you're welcome to do so. The variable would just basically be like this, and then you would just change this to subject, right? And then just like send that via your API call. So we'll talk about the API call later. You can see here, this would be the contents of the email. You can edit the contents. Just go to the designer here. You have a kind of Microsoft Word style editor here that you can change. You can see that we have the message, the from name. If you really look at it, right, the reason that I put all those variable names in the email form, it's to mirror what email.js has in their own kind of template format here. So in the template here, the thing that you want to take away after you're done setting up all of your pieces of information is what the template ID is. So just remember, going over to settings here, you'll be able to find the template ID. We're going to need it later on. So just remember where you can find it so that we're going to be able to use it. This is just going to be the email template that I'm going to use for the tutorial. We can do more later on, but for the most part, right, this is the one that I'm going to use. The to email, I just wrote user email. A little slight variation there. could just change it to to email, but just use your email. You can see the from name here, to name, message, and then just a little very respectfully the Poke Apps team. So, one of the ways that you can test it, right? You can provide what the to name, the message, the from name, email, user email, all that type of stuff, and send a test email, right? So it'll actually change this JS code here to match all of the different parameters that you provided there. But they're going to be hard-coded, right? Just like how they provided in a string format here. Ours is going to be variable, so it's not going to be the most useful thing in the world to copy it from here, but at least you'll be able to see where all the pieces go. So cool. The last part that you should take note, right? So we have service ID. So you're going to remember that you can grab your service ID here, your template, go into your template here, go to settings, you can grab your template ID. The last thing that you're going to need is from this accounts page here, you're going to need your public key here, right? And so all three of these things you're going to need in the code later to be able to make a valid API request to be able to send an email. Cool, let's jump back into the code. So it's incredibly bad practice to just hard code in service ID, template ID, any API key directly into your code. You should never be like copy pasting it directly into any TypeScript, JavaScript code. The way that you're safely able to do it and is considered best practice is by going to the absolute root of your project out here with all of these files out here. The best way that you can do it is deselect everything and then create a new file, and the file that we're going to create is dot, not comma, dot environment dot local here, and we're going to basically put all of our service ID, template ID, and API key into this file. So first we're going to do email service ID, enter, and go back to our service ID here. We're just going to copy this, add it in here. We're going to do the same thing. We're just going to do email template ID, grab the template ID, which is here. Great. And then last but not least, email. I'm just going to be more specific here. I didn't put in my source code, but email JS public key, and then put it here. Just copy paste it. So you can see there what we have so far: email service ID, email template ID, email JS public key, and then provide all of them in there. Make sure that you write it the way that you want to. When later on when we use it, there's no autocomplete, so you just got to make sure that you spell it correctly in the way that you want, and you're going to remember. Cool. And honestly, the best way is to just double click on it. You'll have the full variable name highlighted. You can just copy and then paste it directly in. I barely ever write them directly in. It's always safer to do it that way. So first we're going to install email.js. So we can install it by just going to the installation here under SDK and grab this piece here. And what we're going to do, just hit enter after pasting that in there. We have that now saved. So what we can do is we can import email.js from at email.js/browser there. Cool. Then we're going to need to create an actual on submit. So we're going to remove this portion here. We're going to create actually we're going to call it send email. And what send email is going to look like is const send email is equal to email values. So I'm just going to name it explicitly just so that it's more clear instead of just writing values. We're going to grab our email form values from our email forms just so that we know this is what's going to be sent through into our send email function. here. Then we're going to just do email.js dot send. We need to provide, let me see here, if it lets us, the service ID here. So basically by hovering over send, you'll be able to see what's needed. We'll need our service ID. We'll need our template ID. We're going to need the template parameters, which will be just our email values here, right? From name, email, to name, all those variables there. And we're going to need to pass in options, which will be our public key. Okay, in order to fill out the parameters, we're going to do process.env. And look, when we use process.env, we want to open back up our environments.local here. And just copy paste. Look, you can try to rewrite it every single time yourself, but for me personally, you just want to make sure that it's absolutely correct, because this is not going to autocomplete, and it's not going to return an error if you write it wrong, right? If I wrote like lowercase d here, it doesn't say anything, right? So there's no indication that it's wrong, so you got to be able to provide it. And we're going to see, right, this might be undefined, and so in order to just force it to be a string, you put the exclamation point here. That'll let TypeScript know that it's going to be forced to string. Since we know that we've declared it here, we don't have to worry about the fact that we're using this explicit operator here. So next we have right, service ID, template ID, then the message itself. So next it's process, and it actually auto-completes. Let's just make sure that this is correct. It is. And then lastly, we're going to spread it. And remember that inside of our template here, we actually used user email instead of to email. I mean, I could change this to email and then just pass in email values because they're all going to match, I believe. There's a squiggly line there. Oh, that's just the browser one. So then everything matches. So I think in the past I probably used user email as opposed to to email in that template that I was trying. And then last off we have process .env, and again, why autocomplete sometimes wrong. It did not choose this public key, so we're going to use the public key here. And so usually I space these out, by the way. That's just a little stylistic choice that I made. So we're going to try to run this, but just a word of warning, we're going to run into a problem, and we're going to need to debug this a little bit. So I'm actually going to wrap this into a curly brace function. You don't need to do this. This is just because I want to be very explicit about showing certain things here and showing what some potential errors are. I actually ran into the problem when I was creating the sample code to kind of walk myself through creating this tutorial. I had a lot of difficulties actually debugging this, and so I just wanted to showcase it to everyone to make sure that we don't fall into the same pitfalls. But we're going to use this naming convention here. There's going to be some changes, but when we're doing some of the debug stuff with console.log, you don't have to follow that because it's not going to be in the final thing. But yeah, just follow for the sake of learning. If you'd like, if you're not, just sit back, relax, learn, and we'll move on. So to actually see if we send an email, email.js returns a promise, I believe. And so right here, you can see it returns a promise, so confirmed. Given that it's a promise, what we can do is do a dot operator and then call the then function. And then do just console log email sent. So that we just see within our console when we do the example to see if the email sent or not. Now, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, this is not going to work. We're going to see why in a second, but let's just go through the motions here. and show like why this, which looks kind of reasonable, isn't going to work. Also, one last thing. We're going to need to actually set up some configurations to actually get email.js. I almost forgot to do it. One of the things that we're going to need is to create a email.js.config file here at our root. So sorry for not collapsing it and showing it. If you go down here and you just hit right click out here and hit new file when you've deselected everything in this kind of helpful explorer bar here, we create an email.js, make sure that's one word, dot config dot TypeScript TS. And then what we're going to do is import email.js from at email.js/browser. And then we're going to actually need something to be able to use our environment variables here, or inside of .env.local. And we're going to install it. We're going to npm install .environment. So it's a library, or a package, sorry, that enables us to use those environment variables. Very helpful. So what we're going to do is import config from .env, there, .environment. And we're going to call the config function, and then let it know that the environment variables can be found in .env.local. Cool. So now our project knows where to find the environment variables. And then we're going to do email.js.init here and add in block headless true. Limit rate ID app here, throttle 10,000. So this is just saying this, because this is in milliseconds, I believe, and so we're just saying that we want to allow one request per 10 seconds. So just so that someone's not rapidly spamming out emails in our project. What we also want to provide is our public key explicitly. So, okay, that actually just confirm. Yep, that's correct there. We just want to provide our public key at the initialization. So cool. That is providing the configuration there. That should be able to allow us to actually find process.env with .environment library here with config. So let's jump into it. Again, not going to work necessarily, but if we go back into the console, get rid of everything, and just provide, my name, George. I'm sending an email to myself. Send it to my work email and just say hello from Poke CRM. So let's try to submit it and see what happens. A little exclamation point, a little razzle dazzle there. Oh, this is not a valid email because I did not do .com. Good catch there. I'm going to do submit, and it says, weirdly enough, the public key is required. And little email.js helpful link there, but weird, we're not able to find the public key, even though in our code here we explicitly describe it. Well, one of the ways that we can try to debug this is just see console.log process.env, and then just copy this in, and so when we try to submit it, we'll see that the console log says that it's undefined, which is super weird, right? Because we explicitly say it here, we copy-pasted everything, so the spelling is correct. So why isn't it working? Well, I had to learn the hard way, tried to debug it, figure it out myself. So for whatever reason, I know for a reason, NextJS has very explicit naming conventions that need to be followed. And so when something is being written in the code and needs to be used within the browser, not at the environment level, but within the browser itself, you need to actually change your environment variables, their names, and actually explicitly say next public underscore email service ID. And actually, let me just test this out with just the public key here. And some of these, I believe, let's just put that there for now. And we'll work through every problem in and of itself. So if we hit submit here, right, it says the service ID is required. And so that means that we need to provide this next public to it, because you see that it didn't say the public key is missing. So we just go back, add this to everything here in our environment local. Whoops, too far. There. So we have next public in front of everything that we need to call here. We'll add it here. We'll add it here. Just make sure everything is here. Everything here. We don't need to, oh, we need to add this here to our public key inside of the config. And so, yeah, let's just clear down to the relevant files that we're going to need. We don't need separator. Clear down, make sure everything's clean. Oh, yep, to email. That's correct. So all of this should be matching within our email request here. To name, from name, to email, and message, which is exactly what we have here. So let's clear this down and see if this fixed it. Oh, and it seems like something is wrong. The recipient address is empty. So this to email doesn't seem to be working. So let's try and, oh, it's because I did not save it when I made the change. There we go. So remember to save everything. Make sure that this is grayed out, that everything is saved. If I hit submit now, email is sent. And if we take a look at my email here, you can see as the time that I'm recording, we just got a little email from ourselves, right? 0 minutes ago. So I did not, write an email to myself and fake it out. It was actually sent right away. Hello to myself, which is what we put here in the to name, right? The little message, hello from Poke CRM here, very respectfully, Poke Apps team, right? And so you can see no other email on top of this. Let's just try to change the message here again and just do submit. Email is sent again. Refresh my email. We'll see a new message. Hello from Poke CRM again. So confirmed, we were able to successfully send an email. This is like a bow moment. Ta-da! Now we're ready to actually move forward and create some of the other screens within our wireframe. So let's move on to the next step.